Welcome to the first episode of Office Hours, where I field your questions about generative systems health, aka pelvic health, in all manner, through the lens of my work in evolutionary gynecology over the last 20 years. We'll also explore ways that we can simply generate health for ourselves in various ways through our life. Okay, let's get straight to it. First question for today is, I've been wondering about cervical de-armoring as related to cervical orgasms. Have you explored this with yourself or others? What have you learned about the cervix over time energetically through your work? Okay, so I think I've been hearing people talk about this idea of cervical de-armoring for maybe 10 years. And I think that de-armoring in general is a great term that we can use when we are reclaiming or recovering some aspect of our body in releasing material energetically or emotionally, and we are then able to experience more contact, more presence, more sensation, basically more inhabitants through that part of our body. And from my work with the pelvic bowl and doing internal pelvic therapy, I definitely have found that our pelvis can hold a lot of emotional material. The tissues of our vagina, our vulva, deep in the pelvic bowl and certainly around the cervix and on the cervix can elicit discomfort, painful sensation, tenderness, or numbness. And all of those signals, all of those felt, or in the case of numbness, not felt experiences, definitely can invite us to court more relationship with those tissues. And for me, that looks like simply just spending time with those tissues. The tissues of our pelvis are very responsive. They're very changeable. They're very ready for transformation. So our gentle, loving, patient attention with ourselves in the root of our body is the primary medicine that I use and I invite others to use to meet what is it that's held here. What is it that is held in these tissues that's showing up as pain or discomfort or tenderness or numbness? And sometimes we get to know what that material is and other times not. Sometimes simply the act of just being with the tissues, leaning in with all of our heart, allows them to unravel and we get more free. And there might not be language to explain how or why or what was there before. So all that to say, what I'm speaking to is what I observe and experience in all of the pelvic tissues, in any of the pelvic tissues. For me, the cervix is not so different or unique in that respect, except that our cervix is often traumatized in gynecology appointments, whether we realize it or not. So here's a little model of a uterus. And here, let's see, there's a little indent in this model. Well, it just looks like a tiny mark, but it is indented slightly. So this is the face of the cervix that we can reach often by inserting one finger into our pelvis and feeling for this doorway of the uterus that extends into the vaginal cavity. So then the rest of our pelvis is like this. There's this upper ceiling to the pelvic bowl. So we really just get to access this face of the cervix. That is the gatekeeper of our uterus. And the cervix, is what gets swabbed and sometimes scraped in a pap smear. Nowadays, I see gynecologists using this nice little, like, it looks like a tiny little broom with soft bristles, but they used to use like a mascara wand instrument, which I found to be much more painful. I think the new instrument is better, but it still isn't awesome. And we're making this very deep contact into the body in these appointments without usually any emotional connection or checking in. I speak at length about this in another video called How to Have an Amazing Time at the Gynecologist. For now, here, I just want to draw out this one point that our cervixes are often traumatized in gynecology appointments. So that is one way I see our cervix really needing some special attention or special consideration that, as long as we've been having pelvic exams in our life, we have probably been experiencing unpleasant contact with our cervix in those circumstances. So the cervix is what dilates to allow for birth of our babies vaginally. The cervix is also the space through which menstrual blood flows, and this is the external os, this outer opening, and inside the uterus is another, even more tightly guarded muscular doorway called the inner os. And between these two gateways are these cave-like structures that produce cervical fluid, which can be sperm hotels if we have sex with sperm-having humans. These crypts, as they're called, cervical crypts, start to produce fertile quality fluid as our bodies produce estrogen and move towards ovulation. And that substance can nourish any sperm that is in our body and actually host the sperm in the sperm hotels of the crypts for up to 5 days while the sperms hang out waiting for ovulation. So the cervix is a gateway, it's a doorway, and I find that the cervix energetically and emotionally often has a lot of a relationship with boundaries, how we identify and assert boundaries, how we exercise our boundaries on a day-to-day basis, and how our relationship with boundaries has been throughout our life. And certainly our cervix can be involved in any situation where our boundaries have been violated. Because the cervix is like a sentinel. It's this watchtower energetically. So the face of the cervix is swabbed during a pap smear because there's a transition zone between the cells on the outside of the cervix and just inside the os. And that transition zone can produce irregular cells when we have been exposed to HPV, and those irregular cells can progress into cancerous cells. So we have this area checked. They swab, they do this, light scraping of the cells from this transition zone to read what are those cells doing. So just the physiology of the cervix, I think, is such a beautiful example of boundaries. This is the outside, this is the inside, and this is the threshold. This is the place where we pass through. Certainly what happens inside of the uterus is very different than what happens outside of the uterus in regards to our pelvic health, what's happening in our cycle. The uterus is the inner sanctum. So, all of that to say, our cervix is really ripe terrain for us to court relationship with this part of our body and spend time with whatever physical sensations or feelings arise from contacting our cervix. So this is a very long way of saying yes, I work with cervical de-armoring all the time, but I don't think I ever call it that, because I just see the cervix as one more aspect of our pelvis, of our pelvic system, of our generative health, which is unique in many ways, some of which I've spoken to here, and certainly deserves attention, just like any other aspect of our body. Okay, so really simple ways to explore what's happening in our cervix physically, energetically, and emotionally is simply insert one finger into your vagina and feel for this little protrusion of flesh that can feel like your chin or your nose. In some bodies, our uterus is quite tipped away from center. So optimally, we would be positioned like this, and we would have really great access inserting our finger, just go straight to the cervix. But our uterus can be tipped and snug our cervix way over to the side or all the way back. Our uterus can be kind of more folded onto itself in this shape. So if you feel for your cervix and you can't find it, that would be a great situation to bring to any practitioner who does womb balancing massage, womb centering massage. Cervical orgasms are really interesting. I mostly read a lot about them. I haven't had anyone in my practice talk with me about cervical orgasms. I can't say that I have experienced specifically a cervical orgasm where I could say, oh, that was definitely the cervix and not the erectile tissue of my clitoris or G-spot involved. In my body, it feels very fluid and encompassing everything, all of my tissues. So I think for myself, I'm probably having what I read about described as blended orgasms. And I also read that people can have really distinct experiences of what they identify as a cervical orgasm that like spreads up from the pubic bone to the navel and can morph into full body sensations of pleasure or sensations of being in an altered state. I certainly have felt that plenty too with orgasms. So it's interesting. Like there's plenty of courses and people making their whole thing about cervical orgasms. The main one that I know about is Olivia Bryant. She's Australian, and her work is called Cervix, and she has a lot of offerings. I haven't taken any of them, but there's definitely plenty of people talking about cervical orgasms as a specific thing. I think that the more we learn to read our nervous system patterns and understand what ease feels like in our system, what trust and surrender feel like in our system, and the more we learn what catalyzes our feelings of trust and ease and surrender, more and more is available to us in pleasure. More is available to us through the tissues of our body, through our sensory perceptions, through our nerves. So, again, this is a very long way of saying yes and no. I definitely work with this, and not in the ways that I hear or read most people talking about it. Because my approach is really simply just what's the next step in being in deep, intimate relationship with ourselves, with our bodies, with our emotional experience, in observation of our thoughts and mental patterning, and go from there. What I always feel is there's always more available to us in sex and pleasure. And I know certainly a lot of people feel that there's more possible. And it's true, more is possible. More is possible. And I think that any sincere, devoted study of how to explore that terrain yields great reward. Great reward. Okay. I think I'll stop there for the cervix question, cervical orgasm, cervical de-armoring. I welcome any follow-up questions. We can continue this in next office hours. Okay, let's see here. Another sex question. I just started seeing someone. The sex is really great. However, I don't orgasm easily, but I do when I masturbate, and it's nothing special, just what I'm used to. What's going on? Are there benefits to cutting back on masturbation when you have a regular sexual partner? My mind goes lots of different ways with this question. Okay, so I'm in no particular order, because this kind of question, many people could ask this kind of question. Let's see if one of the things that I says lands for the person who asked it, but I'm going to just go in all the directions that my mind takes me here. So the sex is really great. However, I don't orgasm easily. Okay, it's a new partner. So often our body is still finding trust on a nervous system level. And we might not find that trust readily. Like the animal of our body isn't settling in the way that allows us to orgasm. Now, this question of trust, I see going two primary ways. So one is I see some people, and I have experienced myself too, having like wild, hot, amazing experiences of pleasure with someone totally new. There is no trust, and that no trust also means there's been no breaches of trust. So that totally blank slate allows for a freedom that isn't readily found in a relationship where there have been layers of hurt that perhaps haven't been tended all the way, or residual traumas, so there can be that blank slate situation, which sounds like that's not what's happening here, because if there was that blank slate nervous system experience of the nervous system basically being like, it's almost better that there's no trust, because that means that trust wasn't broken. Like it's just totally free. The animal body is free. But more often, especially as we get older, or as we mature, I should say, because it has to do with emotional maturity, I think. I see that our nervous systems get more sensitive and require more of our partners, require more to settle fully and open fully into pleasure. So this dynamic plays out, I see, in younger people being in the fires of passion and, just being younger, being not as developed emotionally, and having lots of sexy times, having lots of access to their sensuality. And then as they move perhaps into their 30s or 40s, feeling less of that fire available. Someone just started a lawn machine. I'm going to have to close the window here. Okay. So in this second dynamic that I'm talking about, where over time, it's like the bar gets higher, the more emotionally aware we are and emotionally mature we are, the more our nervous system demands a foundation of trust and security to open in sex, in particular, in this situation where we are being penetrated, where we are really vulnerable and open. So This second dynamic is what I sense perhaps happening within this question is there's maybe been some maturation between lovers or through lovers or over the years where the sex can be quote unquote great, but there isn't yet this depth to really hold all of you. And the more we mature on a spiritual and emotional level, I think the more we value being seen, really seen for who we are. And often that depth of being seen can only come with time and really getting to know someone by accompanying one another through experiences, joyful and hard. Okay, another way my mind went is just simply that sometimes the sex can be great, but it's not necessarily like contacting our clitoris in the way that provides us the most sensory stimulation, or there's not quite enough like warm up in the way we like it. Like when something is new, it is just new. So perhaps it's just about body literacy, where it can be great, but your lover maybe hasn't just learned to listen and follow your body's signals in the way that your body finds most delightful. When I masturbate, and it's nothing special, just what I'm used to. But I do orgasm when I masturbate, and it's nothing special, just what I'm used to. Okay, awesome. So path to orgasm is still there. Often masturbation can habituate us to certain ways of opening to pleasure. So I think it's always worthwhile playing around. If we feel like we do the same thing every time, or a specific sequence can only bring us to orgasm, I think it's really great to just branch out and still use some of those things, but then explore and experiment what else feels good or what else is interesting. OMGYes is a really great website. There's 2 seasons, and one is about external pleasure and one's about internal pleasure, and it's all interviews of cis female folks talking about their experience of exploring their bodies, knowing their bodies. It's graphic, so they will have some interviews where the person will talk about their pleasure while pleasuring themselves. It's amazing. I thought that I knew so much about my own pleasure, but I bought it because it's only, I think, $25 a season, and you have lifetime access to it. But I learned so much just even about expressing what I like specifically. Or, fine-tuning, oh, that pressure is great. I like just a little bit higher up, just it's wonderful for getting really clear on like, what do I like? What do I like? How do I like it? And how do I talk about it? So I highly recommend that for this piece about body literacy and learning our bodies as our own lovers and helping our lovers learn our bodies. Are there benefits to cutting back on masturbation when you have a regular sexual partner? The only thing I can say here is masturbation with a vibrator specifically can overstimulate and desensitize the nerve endings of our clitoris. So that's the one situation where I do recommend less, and hopefully, perhaps, if it feels possible, moving away from masturbation with a vibrator totally. Someone else asked me about vibrators recently, and I realized that it's been quite some years since I've done an extensive survey of the market. So there might be some new tech that's super subtle vibration or has enough variation that it's not overwhelming our nerve endings with the same repetition or an intensity that then renders us less sensitive to more subtle contact. So it's possible that there's some new tech available that could be wonderful and not desensitizing in the way that I'm talking about. But are there benefits to cutting back on masturbation when you have a regular sex partner? I don't think so, necessarily. Notice if you're masturbating via the same pathway every time, and if so, like, explore in the ways that I'm inviting what else might be interesting to widen your horizons, your erotic horizons, and consider if it's with a vibe that could be decreasing your sensitivity to your partner. Okay, now we're going to switch channels a little bit, and I got a couple of great questions about generating health for ourselves in general. How do you cultivate intimate friendships when the structures of work and city geography keep you from spending your long days together? Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could just spend our time doing whatever we want, including every day spending time with our most beloved friends? It's true that we often aren't living near one another, and we have individual schedules that prevent us from seeing one another as much as we'd like. In this day and age of this kind of separation, I have found technology to be so helpful via WhatsApp voice messages and Marco Polo videos. In using these voice and video messages, I've been doing this for years now, since coming to Brazil 7 years ago. It's been the main way that I've stayed in touch with my deepest friends, and the main avenue we've used to nourish our relationships. And I found that this one-way sharing can actually be a path to even deeper connection, because I'm just sharing. Like, I don't feel the sense of, oh, let me stop. I just talked about myself a bunch and let me ask you about you, or let you talk about you dynamic that often occurs when we're together in person. Of course, we want to not take up all the airtime and hear our friend, hear what's going on for our friend. But in the one-way communication, I think it opens this really beautiful window to share at a very deeply vulnerable level, and to be received by our loved one when they have the full space and capacity to receive us. So highly recommend voice messages. They only get longer. I think my longest message now is 31 minutes that I left last week for some of my closest friends. I actually did a group voice message because I was like, I gotta communicate. A bunch of things just happened and it was kind of a lot. I'm gonna say it once to all of you and send you all the same message. Usually I am, that's the only time I've ever done that. Almost always I'm leaving individual messages. Okay, what's a song on your heart that you feel contributes to the healing and balancing of masculine and feminine? And then I'm going to read the next question from this person too, even though it's a different question. What plant allies and plant medicines do you see as being critical for the current stage of our human evolution? This was one question, or these two questions. Actually, I had this urge to get on Spotify and look for the song that I could recommend, or I was racking my brain for the song that I could say, this is the song that is so moving to me right now. But in regards to this first question, what's a song on your heart that you feel contributes to the healing and balancing of masculine and feminine? For me, that it changes day to day. It really does. And what I feel moved to speak to in response to this question is there's so much healing available to us through song, through music, and the appropriate prescription is the one that speaks to us. It's the one that speaks to us, the one that touches our hearts, and I think the most important thing for us is to simply sing, more than know which song is the best one, which isn't the question. But I noticed I went that way, like, oh, there's one song, or there could be a song that's a good prescription for this time, this healing of the masculine and feminine. And this like one solution mentality, I think, is really easy for us all to orient towards, especially in Western culture, where I look to the traditions that I learned from here in Brazil, and everything I know about intact traditional cultures. Singing together is what balances the masculine and feminine. Singing is what does it. My dog's dreaming and snorting over here. Mini yipping. Singing itself is the medicine. So I think the question for all of us, how can we sing to balance the masculine and feminine? That balance for our world has to begin with the balancing that we make within ourselves and in our lives. What needs to be healed between the masculine and feminine within each of us, within our closest relationships, in how we relate to the feminine and the masculine. And this broader lens is also what I'd like to bring to the second question. What plant allies and plant medicines do you see as being critical for the current stage of our human evolution? On one hand, I would say, visionary plants that help us pray, plants that help us penetrate beyond the boundaries of our mind, like San Pedro and ayahuasca, plants that help us journey. But journeying plants are not necessarily for everyone, and I have seen plenty of people in totally delusionary states having done a lot of this kind of plant medicine. So the plant medicine in and of itself is also not necessarily the solution. There's not, everyone should go do this kind of ceremony or work with this flower essence, or there are plenty of plant allies that are critical for the current stage of our human evolution. I think actually it's all of them. All of our plant allies are critical. And so that really puts into perspective the great value of our extended communities of gardeners and plant crafters and ceremony keepers. It really illuminates how important each of our paths with plant medicine is. And again, like backing way up with this question to look through this long lens, I feel really strongly what's most important for us is to engage with our plant allies, engage plant medicine. And that can be in pausing to meet a plant that calls our attention on a walk. Always. That's one of the most profound connections that we can have multiple times a day, is just pausing and being with the essence of the plant as it's communicating to us in that moment, through the movement of nature, through its life cycle, through its expression of green and flower, of seed, wherever it is in its life cycle. I truly believe that all of the solutions that we seek, they're right here. They're in us and they're in the earth. And there's so much wisdom available to us in pausing and listening deeply, listening to our body beneath our hands, listening to our breath, listening to the wind, listening to the turning of the season, listening to the mystery of the soil and all its creatures, creating and dismantling and turning over this great substrate of the earth that gives all of us life. So, what plant allies and plant medicines do you see as being critical for the current stage of our human evolution? Every single one. Every plant that calls your attention, every flower that sparks a light in your eye and your heart, any flower essence you're drawn to. I do feel that flower essences as a class of medicine are very indicated right now, because we need to grow always our capacity to perceive and understand subtlety. And flower essences work with such exquisite subtlety, but they are able to unlock such profound vaults within us. I read Asia Suler, an amazing plant worker and author. She wrote once something that I'll try to repeat here. Some things are so heavy, they can only be, it's like they're under lock and key. Yeah, some things in us are so heavy, it's like they're under lock and key. Flower essences are small enough to fit through the keyhole, something like that. And it speaks to this exquisite subtlety and great potency of flower essences. We're working with the most delicate medicines. And when I think about it, it feels like a perfect medicine for our nervous systems. We're so sensitive, whether we realize our sensitivity or not, and we're dealing with so much chaos and suffering in our own lives and witnessing the world and feeling the earth itself. So let's use all the plants. Let's let the plants help us. Okay, our last question is multi-layered and takes us more into the realm of Chinese medicine specifically, in relationship to the Great Chong Mai. The Great Chong Mai is this deepest central channel that runs the full length of our body, penetrating through the deep core of our system, and it's the first channel system to develop when we're in utero. I believe it becomes the container for our nervous system. In relation to the Great Chong Mai, what does vessel of destiny mean? So in the oldest Chinese medicine texts, the Great Chong Mai is referred to as the vessel of destiny. And I understand this to speak to our life curriculum that we are born into. It's said also in the oldest texts that when we are in utero, our heart receives our life curriculum. Our life curriculum is planted. Our destiny is planted in the seed of our heart. And it is through the communication of our heart and our will that's housed in our kidneys and our generative systems. Also, our generative systems generate. That's the creative force housed in our pelvis. It's this interchange between our heart and our root, I say, our destiny and our will, that allows us to manifest, to realize our life curriculum, to live it. So that's what I understand it to mean as the vessel of destiny. It's literally the vessel in our body that holds this exchange between our heart and our root, the truth of who we are and what we're here for, and our capacity to live that truth into being. Okay, and then being trans and non-binary, I've been curious how identity or expression might be related to the expression of one's destiny in a given time. So, knowing that one is trans or non-binary is exactly what the Chong Mai is. It's the deepest knowing of who we are, and that is part of our destiny. I am here. I know who I am. So let's see. How identity or expression might be related to the expression of one's destiny in a given lifetime. I don't think it's separate. I think that our identity and expression is the expression of our destiny in this lifetime. Okay. I'm also curious about what presentation and or symptoms might lead one to pick Chong Mai points for a particular patient, perhaps a block in expressing their full expression. Spiritual, physical, or emotional points that might tip you off to Chong involvement. Okay, so this gets much more analytical in the direction of Chinese medicine diagnosis and point prescription in treatment. I consider myself a great Chong practitioner in that I am always working with the great Chong Mai. It is the only thing I work with, except when someone is sick with something really superficial, like a cold or sinus infection. And there's just, when we're really afflicted on a superficial level with a pathogenic factor, as we call it, we don't have very much capacity to go deep, I find, with the kind of invitation and direction that I give in sessions for encountering this deep central pathway in ourselves and inhabiting this central pathway with our attention, with our breath, with our heart. So I'm not going to be able to answer this question most likely in the way that the asker was hoping, because I don't pick points. So often the Chong Mai in Chinese medicine is utilized as a vessel, as a channel trajectory that has points that activate the channel. But in my work, I'm working with the Great Chong Mai, which is older than the Chong Mai as a pathway. It is the central channel itself, and it contains a couple other pathways, the Ren Mai and the Du Mai. This is getting a little deep here for anyone who's not have their head deep in Chinese medicine. So I'm not working with the Chong Mai as a channel only. I'm working with it as the living bridge that makes humanity the bridge. It is the living pathway that makes humanity between a bridge between heaven and earth. It is a dynamic, it is an open pathway of interface between the wisdom of the earth and the wisdom of the astral. So I'm not working with specific points at all per se. I'm going very outside of the bounds of what I was taught in my Chinese medicine training, in that I work with the points that I am drawn to in that person's body. And sometimes they are belonging to the Chong Mai, attributed to the Chong Mai, and sometimes not. But whatever points I am working with, I'm working with them because I feel that they are directly connected to this person's inhabitants through their central axis of being. Okay, so what presentation and or symptoms might lead one to pick Chong Mai points for a particular patient? I'm always working with Chong Mai. The only time where I'm not so much is when I'm like treating a superficial situation like a cold. Because we all have blocks in expressing our true nature. It's the homework of our time. So I see everyone presenting blocks, including myself. We all have blocks in realizing who we are and what we're here for and how to make this work that we're called to from the depths of our soul manifest within the span of our life, within the constraints of our culture and structures. I mean, it is such a big thing to be alive today. So, Chong Mai all day, every day. That's what I got to say about that. Okay, thanks so much for this first round of questions. I'll be taking more questions for this format ongoing, and I look forward to next time. Thanks so much for tuning in.